Sadiq, the man challenging him to be Mayor of London, is of course the independent candidate and former Tory Rory Stewart, who joins me now. Rory, thank you for being on the show. What is your first reaction to this decision by the Court of Appeal today?
Well, I think the first one, which is really important, is that it's taking into account the promises that Heathrow made. So Heathrow made promises on climate, and it said that it's not meeting them. And that's going to be very encouraging for people who've been campaigning against the third runway, because a lot of this is coming down to the environmental impact assessment. People accept that, of course, you can benefit an economy by having more flights, but the impact on people who live near Heathrow is horrifying. I have very much felt, visiting communities, particularly close to the airport, the noise pollution, the air pollution, and indeed the environmental impact are really disturbing people. And Heathrow has now been challenged to live up to what they promised, which is that they would be able to meet these targets, and the court said they won't.
So you would say absolutely not, no expansion?
Well, I think the best way to look at this is if they could do what they promised to do, which is to expand without a massive increase in carbon, air pollution, noise pollution, and misery for residents, that's one thing. But the court, which has looked at this very carefully, has concluded they haven't. And I think that's the key consideration. I think this probably means the end for the Heathrow third runway.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but you did vote for the expansion of the runway while a minister.
I did, absolutely. And in fact, one of the things that I've discovered, and it's something that I've thought about a great deal, because I believe politicians need to be able to admit that they're wrong. And one of the things that I learned just spending time with residents around Heathrow is that the impact of that was so much more extreme. And I think what the court has proved very clearly is that Heathrow is not able to live up to the promises it made the government in relation to those things.
Rory, some people might say, cynically, that you've changed your mind simply because you're now running to be the Mayor of London and the Heathrow expansion isn't going to be a vote winner amongst certain parts of the city.
It's a good challenge. I think, firstly, politicians need to be able to admit they're wrong and change their mind. I think, secondly, also part of my job as Mayor of London is representing residents of London. And if the people who live around that airport think this is a horrible thing for their lives, that's something that I have to take very seriously.
So you're pretty confident then, as Mayor of London? You think you've got a realistic chance of seeing off both Sadiq Khan and the Tory candidate, Shaun Bailey?
I do believe we can. The amazing thing about the London election is that it's not like a normal election. It's not first past the post. It's a second preference system, which means that even if I come second to Sadiq Khan in the first round, all the other candidates are then knocked out and their votes are reallocated. So I would be able to get the votes from the Conservative candidate and others and probably win in the second round. This, for example, is how President Macron, who was a centrist and independent candidate like me, won the presidency of France, which was the same system.
Do you have any polling?
We do have polling, and the polling
How
shows
does it show you're going?
So polling shows that I've put on 6 points in the last 3 weeks, so we're gaining fast. I'm currently just behind the Conservative, but I'm confident that we will very soon be in a strong second place. And as soon as I'm in a strong second place, I think there'll be a big change, because people will realise that if they feel, like I do, that Sadiq Khan isn't actually keeping London safe, isn't delivering on the things that he promised to do, and don't think that he's going to be able to take action over the next 4 years, they would vote for me.
Do you have any regrets about leaving the Tories now, Rory? Because at the time it felt like maybe you slumped off in a little bit of a huff. And since you did, Boris seems to be delivering what he promised. All of the so-called catastrophe around Brexit hasn't happened. And I just wonder if maybe your decision was a little bit premature.
It's the best decision I've made in my life. I really love being an independent. I think getting away from these old party political systems, being able to speak my mind, not being bound to a leader, a whipping system or the manifestos, and being able to just simply focus on what works for London has been incredibly useful, because it allows me to listen to people and take action. There's no business that you'd have if you were the Labour or the Conservative candidate of trying to calculate politics. It's all about action, and I think mayors should be independent. The great mayors, Bloomberg in New York, mayors in other cities, are independent figures. And the reason that mayors need to be independent is there's nothing party political about clearing rubbish. There's nothing that Karl Marx has to say about the signalling on the Piccadilly line. What you need is somebody who's effective and delivers.
Was Boris Johnson an effective Tory mayor of London?
He was an immensely colourful mayor. He was there at the very beginning of the mayoralty, so he was only the second mayor of London. And I think he did a good job, and I think in some ways, actually, there were things, even though I very deeply disagree with Ken Livingstone on his anti-Semitism, I think he actually did deliver some things for London. But I think what we're learning from other cities in the world is that mayors have so much more potential than we've realised in London. The mayor has an £18 billion budget. He has more power than the mayor of New York. And we haven't begun to see the potential that a mayor could have for a great city like London to really transform things. And that is both sorting out the basics, safety, affordable housing, transport, but it's also thinking about the future. How do we deal with challenges from coronavirus? How do we think about how to position London after Brexit? And how do we get that green, digital, human future that we all dream of? And that's all about energy, action.
Have you been in touch with Boris Johnson at all since leaving the Tories?
I have. He sent me a very charming letter, which I got yesterday. It's a classic charming Boris letter in his own handwriting, saying he refuses to wish me any luck because I'm not the Conservative candidate, but he's sure that I'll do well in the rest of life. So I thought he got the tone just right for what must have been an embarrassing situation.
And you just got it yesterday?
Just got it yesterday.
And does that give you hope that if you were to win the mayoralty, you would be able to have a proactive and positive working relationship with Downing Street? Because surely that is important for anyone who's going to become mayor.
Absolutely. Absolutely central. The great thing about being an independent is the only thing you need to worry about is what's good for London. So I can be as polite to the central government as I like. If that gets things for London, I can challenge the central government if that gets things for London. The problem for these party political candidates is that if you're Sadiq Khan, you never really want to challenge. You want to do the opposite. You want to challenge all the time because you want to make sure that you have a big fight between Labour and the Conservatives. If you're the Conservative candidate, all the time you have to be polite because you don't want to offend your government. The great thing about an independent mayor is I can have the right kind of relationship, like a business person. I can be thoughtful, I can be patient, but all I've got to ask myself is what is right for London.
Sadiq Khan has been a disastrous mayor for London, don't you think, Rory Stewart?
I think the problem has been delivery. What has he done? 3 simple questions. Do you feel safer than you did 4 years ago? Is your commute better? Is your housing more affordable? He's been a mayor who's approached it as though he was an ambassador, but this is an executive position. We need somebody who runs things. And what I've done all my life, starting as an 18-year-old soldier in Iraq, in Afghanistan, as the prisons minister, is I've got out on the ground and I've run things. And the reason I'm going for this role is I help people best by being out on the ground with people, listening to them, changing things, putting my job on the line. In prisons, I said I would resign unless I reduced violence in a year, and we got that violence down in 7 months. That's the approach that I want to bring to this great city.
Well, I have to be honest, over the past couple of years, and definitely under Sadiq Khan's mayoralty, as a resident of London, I have started to feel increasingly unsafe in the city. And walking home from this show just a couple of months ago, I was mugged by 3 hooded youths on bikes. And I know when I shared my story how many other Londoners have had that happen to them. So have you felt safe while you've been going around campaigning? Because I know you're on foot a lot. And what are you specifically going to do to stamp out the street crime, which is becoming a real epidemic in London?
Well, firstly, I'm very sorry to hear about that story. That's a horrible story. Nobody should have to go through that. Certainly not in a great city like London.
No, and I mean,
our
I love
homicide
London.
rate, it's a great city, and our homicide rate is now at the highest rate for 11 years. Mugging is very, very heavily up, and we can get a grip on this. And the way that we do this is we triple the number of police on the streets. Everything starts with good neighbourhood and community policing. That's what gives you the relationships,
Absolutely.
that's what gives you the information, and it all comes from that. So we...
Oh, have we lost Rory Stewart? That's a shame. The line has dropped out. But hopefully we'll get Rory back in just a moment, because I did actually want to know what he thought about the fact the BBC had shut him out of their debates. But of course, we heard Rory Stewart talking about the Heathrow expansion there. Huge amount of reaction. He has changed his mind. A text message here from Sam, who says, Dan, what a terrible decision concerning Heathrow expansion. These eco-extremists are going to bankrupt the country. I think Rory Stewart is back. Sorry, we lost you, Rory. I just wanted to ask you... Great to have you. I just wanted to ask you before you go. Now, you have actually accused the BBC, I believe, of discriminating against you by shutting you out of its coverage in the lead up to the mayoral election. What's going on? What are they not letting you be a part of? And what do you think the motivation behind that is?
Well, I think it's probably just bureaucratic stuff, but the BBC is saying that they're only going to allow me on the basis of my last electoral performance. Now, of course, I'm running as an independent. I'm not a party. So despite the fact that I have 2 or 3 times the number of votes of the Lib Dems and Greens, despite the fact that if you look at the betting odds at the moment, Conservative candidates on 20-1 and I'm on about 5-1, the BBC is not letting me appear in any of these debates. And that, of course, is a problem, because if you want an independent candidate for London, want somebody who can speak as an independent for London, you've got to have the opportunity to see me.
That's outrageous. It's totally outrageous. Who have you taken this up with? Are you going to speak to the BBC Director General? What's your plan?
I'm writing to the Director General of the BBC because I think it is important that if people are voting, they have a right to see me. And given that I am now probably the strongest contender against Sadiq Khan, it's completely daft to say that just because the Lib Dems or the Greens ran in the last election and I as an independent didn't, I'm not able to go up against it regardless of what the polling says about the support I have in London.
Current polling has to have something to do with the decisions that are made about who takes part in a debate. I just can't understand that. Seems totally nonsensical.
Otherwise, how do you get change in politics? How do you get new people breaking through? How do you get independent voices?
And do you think this is part of the BBC being padlocked to an establishment culture?
I think they find it very difficult to deal with insurgents. They find it very difficult to deal with new things, unfortunately. Now, that's probably because as a public service broadcaster, they feel they're getting attacked all the time. But this is a relatively straightforward argument I'm making. I love this city. I think we can make it so much better. We can really improve safety on our streets. We can get the affordable housing sorted. We can get the transport running. But in order to do it, I need to have an opportunity to actually talk directly to Londoners. Many of them watch the BBC. Many of them listen to BBC Radio, and so if the BBC insists on locking me out of the debate, I'm forced to go a bit guerrilla and forced to try to rely on Twitter and Facebook and getting out on the streets.
Well, you're very good at doing that. I have to ask, just finally, of course, you were the tutor of Prince William and Prince Harry when they were young men. What is your reaction to Prince Harry's decision to step back as a senior member of the royal family and move with his wife Meghan to Canada?
Well, I think it's a great question, but the honest answer is that I feel that being a teacher is a special relationship, and it requires trust between the student and the teacher, so I'm afraid on this one I'm going to be boring. I don't talk about people I've taught, and I certainly don't talk about Prince Harry and Prince William.
Thank you, Rory Stewart. Where are you, by the way? Where are you right now?
I'm sitting outside in the cold in a cafe in South Ken, and I'm about to head up towards Hampstead, where I'm going to be meeting some more people, shaking some more hands, and then tomorrow night I'm going to be sleeping again in someone's house. As you know, one night every week I sleep in a different person's house to see different bits of London. I usually sleep on the floor.
How's it going?
It's great. It's amazing. Last week was Bromley. I was in a homeless shelter in Bromley with 12 men, and it was an extraordinary experience because I was with them for 14 hours. We cleared away our beds at 5:45 in the morning, and there's no substitute for eating with someone, sleeping alongside them, waking up in the morning. You hear things, you learn things you wouldn't learn any other way. And if I'm mayor, I'm going to continue doing that. I'm going to make sure that every week I will be spending at least a night in a different person's house in a different part of London to keep learning. And the great, lovely thing is that I've received over 3,500 invitations so far to stay in people's houses.
Well, that will definitely see you through the whole mayoralty if you do get there. Look, good luck with it. You're certainly doing things differently, and I hope the BBC reverse that decision because it's utterly and clearly ridiculous. That's Rory Stewart, the independent candidate for the Mayor of London.